We're going to move on to the next slide here, which is to really start discussing the distribution of your sensors. Each sensor will monitor the area around it and contest a plethora of access points. How you deploy them depends on your needs and your infrastructure. For example, certain buildings may be more important than others. Different locations may have completely different infrastructure, a different switch layout, different firmware, different models, who knows? Specific areas in the building may be hotspots for users and issues. And you may have 5 sensors. You may have 100 sensors. It depends on your actual deployment. And your placement of the sensors is going to be different depending on how many you really have to cover your system. Now, how do I actually like to think about this? Well, I personally keep a couple of different deployment models in mind, actually 3 total. First of those is going to be coverage-based distribution. If your goal is to cover as many APs as possible, you'll want to have the sensors positioned in open areas with solid visibility of, well, multiple APs. And so I have a representation of a floor plan down here. And keep in mind, this is not designed necessarily to scale. This is for illustration purposes primarily. But we have these blue little magnifying glasses to indicate the Wyebot sensors. And I'm showing these arrows to really point to what this sensor is going to be monitoring for us. So the sensor here is watching these 3 access points. This sensor here is actually positioned right next to an access point, which, to be very clear, optimal placement of the sensors is to have them 3 to 6 feet away from a particular AP to see everything exactly as that AP does. But that's not always feasible. Like here in the top right, I want to cover these 4 conference rooms, and I could place a sensor over here right next to this particular access point, but I rather have it here so I can connect to all 4 of these reliably. When I had it here, I noticed that my network tests were failing quite frequently against this one. So while it's not optimal to see everything exactly as that AP does, I still think this is a very valuable way to deploy these. And then you might be wondering what on earth this sensor down here is doing with it only one AP it's covering. Well, it's next to the IT staff desk. And so I'm a nerd. I feel like everyone on this call is probably a nerd to a degree. I like to have the tool that I might need next to me for sometimes just reactive troubleshooting. Because let's say that someone on the next floor up, we only have sensors on this floor in this particular example. They have a problem. Well, I might move the sensor there to do some reactive troubleshooting. Not ideal is really the thing I'm going to try to hammer home is the idea of proactive monitoring, but it is a nice thing to be able to do in certain scenarios. Now, in contrast to that, we might go for a more infrastructure-based distribution. This is definitely not ideal in terms of coverage, but there is a philosophy behind this. So the paragraph or I guess statement I have up here, you could also deploy the sensors around the logical layout of your network rather than the AP placement. This route lets us catch and pinpoint where outages develop. So the obvious downside here, I have sensors, a couple in each building. Let's say we have an issue up here in this far corner. Someone turned on their printer and then their personal Wi-Fi device can't connect, or maybe their hotspot's not working. Well, we don't have any sensors up here. We may not be able to catch that. But the idea behind this layout is it can catch quite a few very important things. We have really, and to fully explain my crazy diagram here, this is just an image off of Google Earth. I wanted to show what a layout between multiple buildings might look like. We have our main server closet here. This is where the ISP comes in. We have these purple fiber uplinks between each of the buildings, and these green squares are the independent closets in these. So we have 2 closets per, one for the lower, one for the upper. The yellow line is the, well, internal fiber uplink. And then I have these sensors actually not placed in the closet, but in like a classroom or office off of that closet to look from the end user's perspective, connecting through those APs they're actually going to be using, going through that closet to help us catch problems, right? Let's say someone comes in here and puts in a new tree and they happen to cut our fiber in the process of putting in that tree. I'm going to be yelling at them, but yes, neither here nor there. Really, the problem is the connection for this building is going to go down when that fiber gets cut. And so the sensors in this building are going to very clearly show that they're going to drop offline when everything else is online, helping us very quickly see the scope of the problem, knowing that it's just this building that is affected. And I mean, get down to the root cause by seeing exactly when that started and, knowing that we had a team here putting in this tree on that day, or maybe during that hour, like we can get down to that root cause really, really quickly. It's even more helpful for minor issues. Let's say a loop develops in one of the switches in this closet here. Well, that's only going to affect the users in this, and that's actually going to start to spread. Loops do kind of propagate the network. If you've never had to deal with one, lucky. They are not fun. But we would notice that issue first on this sensor, and then maybe next on this sensor, then this sensor, helping us again find the scope, find what is really affected here. You might be wondering why I have two APs, or sorry, two sensors. Even I work at Wyebot, I call them APs all the time. It's hard. Two sensors in the conference room. And the idea behind that is this is a really high volume, really important area of our building. We're hosting events here. We need this Wi-Fi to be working for those events. And so like our dorms, our learning buildings, they're important, but not as significantly important in this particular case as the conference center. Now, which solution is best? Well, depends. And actually, I like to aim for a mix of these two. I like to keep both in mind for a balanced distribution. If possible, having sensors deployed to keep both coverage and infrastructure in mind is best. And what I really mean by that, we're now back looking at a floor plan instead. And here, really what I have laid out is two closets. I kind of regret using yellow as the indicator here, a little bit hard to see, but we have IDF and the MDF. And then on this side of the building, we have all of those APs going to the IDF. On this side, we have all those APs going to the MDF. And the original plan for this floor, well, we were going to cover it with 6 sensors, 3 on either side to really just watch a nice group of the APs, but not looking to cover every single AP because this mailroom, not that important. This lobby area, it's going to be fine. People are just walking through there. They're not constantly working there. But there's also these key areas that I've called out. Our CEO, well, they're the CEO. CEOs get what they want, and so they have an AP in their office just to make sure everything is working for them. When they notice any little blip, we can do the root cause analysis to see what's going on there. Definitely not an optimal placement for the sensor, but sometimes it's necessary. High traffic areas are really key to keep eyes on. This is a really good way to see as the users are walking by some interesting behavior with their devices. In the case of like hotspots, if someone leaves it on, that's a nice way to catch which networks might be coming by. And you can see who has their hotspot enabled. You can sometimes catch some transient retransmission and such. And then up here, we have an area with complaints. So this would be more of a floater unit. You know, we didn't normally have a sensor here. We don't actually plan to keep this sensor here, but we had someone complaining in the gym saying that they can't watch Netflix while working out. All right, well, let's put a sensor there to see what's going on instead of us walking over with an Echo kit and doing a lot of manual testing. Now, in this particular case, the problem might be coverage. We might not have enough APs in this area to cover this room. Or it could be interference between 2 access points. That's part of what putting a sensor in an area is really nice. It can help you expose exactly what that problem is. Do we have a coverage issue? Connect to the APs to test them. Or do we have an interference problem? It's going to definitely call it interference problems for you, especially with its airtime. So that's some of the ideas behind distribution. And, you know, honestly, a lot of you on this call probably already have your sensors deployed, but I wanted to go through this regardless, just so you have kind of this in mind for different routes that you can take depending on your situation. But how should we organize the sensors in these different scenarios? That is very much going to come down to personal preference. The sensors can be organized into what we call locations, which serve as configuration groups and provide data aggregation. Some of our customers separate their sensors per building, others will separate them per use case or by use case, and then some will choose to keep them all in one massive location. Doesn't matter to me. All it really matters for is how you want that data presented and how you want that configuration synchronized between those locations. Which is right, depends on your personal preference. And so, you know, down here I have an example of our demo system. We have our Wyebot Knowledge Park location with a few sensors. We have EME8 demo with 2. Our 4th floor and 3rd floor each have a couple of sensors. We have a fairly small headquarters deployment here, but we have these split out because of the different use case. This here, we have basically some tests to showcase what Wyebot is really good at testing, what it's going to be helpful for. But then we also have internal services that we maybe don't want to just show everyone, like our specific CRM tools and all that stuff. So we have those in separate locations here. Plus, there are different areas of the building. These are kind of all grouped together for the purposes of demo. But my personal preference around this, because I've kind of just said so far, it's, you know, do what you want, but I like to think about this per building. And so I'll usually split up my sensors per individual building or ISP circuits. That way, it's really easy to catch strange route issues, like one of the ISPs having problems. Maybe from that particular area of the city, we're having issues because we're going to have a nice pie chart shown for each location. This gives us a beautiful bird's eye view, especially with its drop down for historical data. We can say, okay, let's look over the past day, see what the failure rate's looking like. Okay, let's go past week, past month, maybe just the past 3 hours. There's some different options in there which we can take a peek at. And clicking on these tiles does take you right to the location.